you know, we're so grateful. I just want to take a minute here to extend our appreciation for everybody that's been involved in this effort. Thanks obviously to Rachel, Will, and Sydney for all of your presentations today. Again, it's just a wealth of information, and we're so happy that it's going to be recorded and posted for anyone to access as reference material when doing SQT work in Wyoming in the future. And you know, we're really proud of this update, and you know, so thankful for the time and commitments and dedication of the IRT members or Wyoming Stream Technical Team members who've contributed so much over so many years. You know, this effort began around 2013 and has extended through the years, and that includes Paul Day with Wyoming Game and Fish Department, Jeremy Zumberg with Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. EPA started off with Julia McCarthy, and now we have Rachel Harrington, and then of course you know, members of our staff have contributed over the years, and then you know, Stream Mechanics will, and EPR with Sydney and Paxton and their staff. So many people to thank. The other districts and states that have carried the torch, passed the baton, and have really contributed to the regionalization of this tool over the years. Obviously, they've made fabulous advancements in each of their own efforts, and it's come kind of full circle, and we've adopted so many of those great ideas. So, you know, thanks to all of those entities as well. And lastly, thanks to EPA for providing funding for the initial Wyoming SQT development, as well as for the update. You know, we couldn't have done it without their support and interest in furthering the science and development of functional assessments for use in regulatory. So thank you to everyone, and congratulations to everybody who is still hanging in there and willing to listen to this last presentation. All right, let me get this pulled up. Share screen, there it is. Okay.
That looks good, Paige.
Okay, thank you for the confirmation, Paxton. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can hear you well.
Yep, you sound good.
Very good. Okay, so my name is Paige Wolken. I am a regulatory project manager with the Omaha District, Wyoming Field Office. And the last presentation of the day is Wyoming Stream Mitigation Procedure, the WSMP. And I'm just going to provide an overview. And currently we have a version 2, which was developed in 2018, that is still in place. I'll kind of touch on a little bit of history when we first developed the SQT, and that was when that was released in 2013. And then we do have plans to update it to version 3 based on some of the updates, again, to the Wyoming SQT and the updates to our regulatory program with the release of newer regulations and policy. So to set the stage, I'll give you a little bit of context regarding mitigation in Wyoming. So in the past, especially prior to the 2008 compensatory mitigation rule. Oops, I didn't forward the slide, did I? Or did I?
I'm still seeing your title page, title
Okay.
slide.
There we go.
Yep.
So in the past, we just had district guidance and state policy to follow. But after the 2008 compensatory mitigation rule, we have much more substantial guidance and information to utilize to implement this aspect of our program. And in the past, there was a really strong preference for on-site, in-kind, permittee responsible mitigation, which was basically in the form of creation. And now we have a much broader view. We're interested in mitigation banks, in lieu fee, providing in-kind credits. Also interested in on-site and in watershed or the watershed approach. And in the past, it was a solid emphasis on replacing acres of aquatic resources lost. And now there is a more of an emphasis on replacing functions that have been lost. And in the past, and unfortunately still currently, most of our mitigation program is permittee responsible. However, we are currently evaluating a proposed in lieu fee program for the state and are still getting interest to develop mitigation banks. And lastly, in the past, we really only focused on replacing wetland losses, compensating for wetland losses. But again, since the 2008 mitigation rule, it really opened a lot of people's eyes to not just consider wetland compensating for wetland losses, but also stream losses. And that's because the rule really helped identify that that streams are difficult resources to replace. And it really encouraged the assessment of stream losses and providing appropriate offset, usually through restoration and enhancement efforts. And so this prompted the development of the Wyoming Stream Mitigation Procedure, the WSMP or SMP. And it was developed by the Corps and our interagency technical work group. And it was released in 2013, version 1. And in general, it provided direction for 404 actions requiring mitigation for stream functional losses in Wyoming. And it was also targeted to calculate stream losses or debits and acceptable mitigation credits. It would be based on an approved stream function or condition assessment and would be used to determine baseline and proposed improvement of the resource. And so that, as Rachel, I believe, mentioned in her presentation, the 2013 version utilized more qualitative assessments, such as the NRCS SVAP methodology, or even the BLM PCN, or I'm losing that term, but I'll move on that. And version 2 was released in 2018. This was a revision primarily based on the development of the stream quantification tool. And so, the Corps and the IRT agreed, in our evaluation of some proposed mitigation banks that an objective, measurable, repeatable, and quantitative functional assessment method would be the most valuable, the most appropriate assessment methodology for determining functional losses and lift. And so that led to the development of the SQT and then the revision of the SMP. And the intent of the SMP was to establish a procedure for determining when stream mitigation may be needed, and then also to help provide a better, more accurate representation to identify or calculate compensatory mitigation debits and credits, and provide predictability and consistency. So the purpose of the SMP is threefold. It identifies the regulatory framework and circumstances under which the Corps in Wyoming may require mitigation. It identifies when and how the SQT may be used or required to assess and quantify stream functional loss and lift. And it describes methods for calculating and adjusting debits and credits for Department of the Army permitted projects in Wyoming. So the regulatory framework would comply with our regulations, primarily the 2008 mitigation rule, as well as other regulation and policy. And then it still must follow sequencing, avoidance, and minimization first before compensatory mitigation for unavoidable losses of waters associated with a Department of the Army permit, to ensure that the adverse impacts to the aquatic environment are minimal. And then again, it would direct how we would determine and calculate stream mitigation debits and credits for losses of those waters. And I guess one thing I did want to mention on the earlier version, the 2013, the foundation of this, it was based on what was called the Charleston method. And then the Montana regulatory group also took that and modified it, and we kind of borrowed their version as the foundation of our SQT, or of our stream mitigation procedure. So under this regulatory framework, when would the SMP and the SQT be used? It would be required for stream mitigation banks and stream and lieu fee projects. And I think that makes pretty clear sense. It's important for establishing baseline conditions, and also critical for establishing a currency, a foundational currency for debiting and crediting. It would also be required for projects resulting in the loss or conversion of 500 feet or more of stream length. And this would include projects that involve channel relocation and reconstruction. The requirement would not include stream restoration and enhancement projects, ditches or canals excavated in uplands, or ephemeral streams. The two documents may be required on a case-by-case basis for projects resulting in the loss of less than 500 feet of stream. For stream projects that result in loss due to installation of new culverts or cumulative sections of culverting or piping for greater than 300 feet in length. and for some cumulative impacts to a single stream, such as maybe greater than 500 feet of rip-wrapped stream bank with no bioengineering techniques. An example is this picture to the right. The documents may also be required for nationwide permits that require a waiver. Nationwide Permit 13 and Nationwide Permit 23 are examples of those. And lastly, the SQT in particular may be required for stream restoration, rehabilitation, or enhancement projects generally permitted under a Nationwide Permit 27 that also typically require individual 401 certification, where net increases in aquatic resource functions and services maybe aren't clear and need to be demonstrated or proven when there are substantial changes in channel geomorphology. This document also addresses how the SQT may be used. And as we've heard throughout many of the presentations today, it's essential for calculating stream losses using the Wyoming Stream Impact Tool, aka the debit tool, for calculating stream functional lift. It's super helpful for project planning, and I think if more sponsors and agents understood that element of the tool and the value that that has early in the process, I think this tool would take off for uses well beyond regulatory. In fact, that's one of the elements of this tool that Wyoming Game and Fish Department really appreciates and tries to integrate or utilize in their program for their projects. It's also important for baseline assessment and post-project monitoring. And the updates that we've made certainly enhance that particular element for documenting that. And the tool in general is just really useful for communicating your goals, objectives, how you're accomplishing those, and how you're proving those up through monitoring. So when should a proponent or agent coordinate with the Corps in advance? Most of the time, especially if the Wyoming Stream Quantification Tool is being used. It's super important to coordinate with us to make sure that you're not doing, too much or not enough, and just so that there's a common understanding that you're starting the process and proposing to do the work that's appropriate for the project, appropriate for the location and the resources, and to meet the regulatory requirements. And so coordinate with us on a parameter selection checklist. Bring that in, identify the parameters and metrics that you believe that the project should address or cover. Discuss those with us. We may identify additional parameters or metrics that may be needed for the project. For example, maybe you want to go ahead and collect data on the fishery and gain some additional credit in that capacity. It's not out of the question. So many people are afraid to go to that level, but for certain projects and to meet certain goals and objectives, it could be really important. And lastly, it's super important to communicate with us if there are any deviations that you're proposing in your approach or methodology. And in rare circumstances with the appropriate rationale, sometimes that makes sense. So again, I think it's emphasized in the user manual and also through the stream mitigation procedure. Come talk to us. So the last thing that the last purpose of the stream mitigation procedure is to describe methods for calculating and adjusting debits and credits for core permitted projects in Wyoming. And you start with the SQT. It characterizes the loss or gain of stream functions at an impact or mitigation site and provides the technical foundation on which to establish debits and credits. And that's in the form of the functional foot score. Then in addition to that, our regulations direct us to consider other aspects of compensatory mitigation that would affect appropriate offsets of types and services of regional resources and the likelihood of ecological success and sustainability. And so within the SMP, we have retained the ability to apply adjustment factors from a policy perspective. And they may be applied to the SQT functional foot score to establish the final debit or credit obligation for the permittee, or to establish the final credit availability amount for the given mitigation bank, in the fee program, or even the permittee responsible mitigation site. The initial debit calculation, again, is how this kind of works. Is the initial debit calculation is derived from initially the functional foot loss at the impact site. And as an example, let's say that the impact site is located on a wild and scenic river. In this circumstance, how these debits and credit adjustments are assigned is that it's what is the deviation from normal standards. So we outline the normal standards here. And in a situation where a permittee is going to impact a wild and scenic river, it may be appropriate to add a 2% adjustment to the functional foot score to compensate for impacts to that type of resource that are kind of above and beyond what is measured by the SQT. On the other side of the process, on say for a mitigation bank, normal standards for mitigation is that on timing, Schedule 2 is that mitigation is provided commensurate and a similar time frame as the impacts. Well, with a mitigation bank, those impacts are actually being mitigated far in advance of those impacts. And so, you know, the mitigation bank would be providing the planning, the design, the construction, and hopefully trending toward meeting performance standards well in advance of when the impacts are actually credited. So that would be a Schedule 1. And for a mitigation bank, it generally makes sense from a regulatory perspective to apply a 3% adjustment gain in credits for that mitigation bank scenario. So those are just a couple examples as to how we may apply adjustment factors, and there are examples of these provided in the WSMP document.